All right, thank you for tuning in today. The purpose of today's video is to create a basic application that uses Kafka. We'll be using Python to consume and produce messages into the Kafka. From there, we'll be ingesting the data into a time series database, and then we'll have some software that will help us visualize the data that we produced. All right, first thing first, let's go ahead and clone down our repository that I made earlier. You'll see the link in the description, but you can also just find it under Batch Corp kafka-demo. All right, now let's pull that up in VS Code. And we're going to take a look at the Docker Compose file. And you can see it's made up of several components. The first one being Kafka. That's where we're going to store our messages. And the next one is Kafdrop. That's going to allow us to visualize the Kafka cluster. And underneath that, we have InfluxDB, and that's going to be our time series database. And we'll use that to analyze the messages we ingest. It's perfect for the kind of data we'll be storing in Kafka, where you can get millions or billions of messages. And then from there, we're going to use Grafana to go ahead and visualize the data that we've processed and pushed into our time series database. First thing first, let's go ahead and spin up our Docker instances. So we're going to use Docker Compose up and -d to daemonize it. Awesome. Looks like they all came up. We'll check Docker. All right, and the first thing we want to check to make sure we're off to a good start is the Kafka instance. Everything here is going to come up on localhost, and every port for each service is mapped on the right side here. So let's take a look. 127 0.1:9000. So this is good news. It means we can connect to our Kafka instance, and there are no topics yet. Perfect. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make our producer. This is where we're going to generate the data that goes into Kafka. So what we want to do is write our topic. We want to make a topic to put data. And in this case, the topic is called RSVPs, and the Kafka URL is our local host, which is where Docker is running it. And you can see that it's running on port 9092. The WebSocket that we've selected is from Meetup. They also have an HTTP version of this, so let's take a look at what kind of data we are looking to collect. Very good. So you can see it's just some basic JSON, and it's just going to tell us a little bit about the venues, the locations, and most importantly is this response yes or no. Basically tells us which member is RSVPing to what event. This is really cool actually, because during my initial research for this project, it was really difficult to find any kind of data streams that didn't require subscription. So really cool of meetup.com to make this available, and it's perfect for the project we're going to be doing today since there's so many values we can analyze. All right. Getting back to our project, so basically we connect to the socket, and this little on message function is very important. This is basically what tells the WebSocket to execute whenever a new message comes in. So you can see on message, we're telling it to connect to Kafka, use the client ID producer, and then encode the message into UTF-8. This is common for Kafka, and basically the reason you do this is to ensure the integrity of the message. So let's go ahead and run our producer and see what happens on the Kafka side. Alright, so it looks like we are producing messages. Let's check if that is the case with Kafka. So we have our topic now. And you can see this total size is an indication of how many messages are in the queue. Alright, so we have a total of 32 now. That's great, but when you're developing an app like this, you want to know what exactly is going inside your queue. We want to make sure we're getting the full messages. So let's go into our Kafka demo project, and we have a little repository, or I'm sorry, a little directory called Plumber, and this is our open source project. Inside Plumber, you can, oh yeah, I probably should show you guys where to download Plumber from. If you just look for Batch Corp Plumber, you'll pull it up in Google, and then you can just curl it down, or if you have Homebrew, you can brew install it as well. But the reason why we made Plumber is because if you're in a large development environment or even medium size, you're going to work with like all kinds of different message queues. So you could be using Amazon SQS. You could be using Google's version of a messaging system, Google's PubSub, it looks like, RabbitMQ, Kafka, and learning the individual tools to use each one of those is very like time consuming. So it's nice just to have a single binary to connect to all those different services. So all we're going to do is just read our Kafka and pull it out in JSON format. So let's give it a minute. Alright, cool. So one thing you'll notice, right, is that there's tons of messages coming in, and that's because the way Kafka works, you're going to be pulling all 176 messages. It's going to start from the beginning. So that's cool. We're getting data. Let's keep on collecting data, and let's look at one of these messages. Alright, so we'll just look at this one right here. So it comes in with a event key. Underneath of that event key, we get an event ID, we get an event name. One thing I can tell you ahead of time is we're not going to do anything with the event name because the formatting takes all kinds of arguments and all kinds of languages, and I'm not gonna push that into InfluxDB. It would take a ton of time to make sure it comes into a format that's acceptable. So we're just gonna skip that, and we're gonna use event IDs instead. What else would be interesting to track? We want to track the state. We'll also track RCPs. We'll track the state, and we'll track the response if it's going to be a yes or no, which I think is, yeah, right here. So, and we'll translate that to a 1 or a 0 based on if it's a yes or no. So let's take a look at our producer code. Actually, we'll pull up in VS Code. I'm sorry. Let's look at our consumer code. I misspoke there. And we'll get rid of this junk. And basically what we have is two functions. We have a client function and a data function. Or I'm sorry, we have a Influx Connect and we have a consume function. So let's look at Influx Connect. Very simple. We're just passing a token and a URL, and we're returning that connection. And then in our consume function, we're connecting to Kafka. We're creating a group ID. We're taking the message from Kafka and we're putting it back into a JSON format. And then we start to look through that JSON and confirm that it has a state associated with it. Basically, all that's doing is just checking that it's in the US, since this application, or since the meetups.com is global and we're only interested in the US. And then we're going to check if the response is a yes. If not, we're going to assume it's a no. And right here, we're just formatting the data that we're interested in: group ID, event ID, group state, and response into a JSON, or I'm sorry, into a format that InfluxDB accepts, which I believe is called line protocol. And so what we have here is the basically what the data is going to be called that we're collecting, and then tags. So we'll have a tag called a group ID, a tag called an event ID, a tag with the state, and then the actual 1 or 0 based on if it's an RSVP or not. Alright, so pretty simple. We do need to set up Influx now, so let's go look at our Docker. Influx is listening on port 8086. Let's get started. We'll give it a username of demo and password. Oh, it's got to be 8 characters, so we'll do demo password. We'll call it batch as the organization, and then the bucket, which is like equivalent to our database, is RSVP. And we'll configure this later. And now what we're going to do is confirm that we do have a bucket and that there's no data in there yet. You would start to see it right here, and there is none yet. So let's go back, and we're going to click on Python, and we're going to get the data we need to connect with our Python software. So let's pull up VS Code. We'll adjust the token. And we'll keep this the same. I've already pre-populated it, so if you use the same syntax that we've been following, you can keep the org as batch and the bucket as RSVP. All right, let's pull up a terminal, and we will start to consume this data. All right, let's see if our data is coming into our bucket or database. Yes, so we have an event, we have a response field, we have event IDs, we have group IDs, we have states. That's perfect. So now that we have our data, we need to go ahead and set up Grafana. Once again, we'll come back to Docker and we'll confirm the Grafana port, and that is port 3000. Alright, the password here is just admin, and the user is admin. We're going to skip setting up a new password, and the first thing we're going to do is set up a data source, and we're going to select InfluxDB, and we're going to use Flux to connect. Now, when you're connecting Docker to another instance, you want to use the service name. So if you look at the Docker Compose here, you'll see InfluxDB is the name of the database we want to connect to. if you use, you can't use localhost between Docker instances. It's going to just try and connect to itself. So, and I'm just going to confirm the port is 8086, and it is. Okay. All right, and we will turn off basic auth, and we're just going to use the same connection info. Let's get the token. Whoops. The bucket is RSVP, and let's save and test. And we got the green check mark, so that means it is able to connect to our Grafana, and it found 3 buckets. All right, so now what we want to do is make our first graph. So we're going to go into dashboards. We're going to add an empty panel, and then we're going to go into Flux Queries. Basically, I've already pre-populated these, but we're going to go into our bucket RSVP. We're going to look for the event measurement, and we're going to look for the field response, and then we're going to group the event IDs, and then we're going to sum up basically all the response values. We'll group it again, and that's just the way Flux works, and then we'll get the top 10. So let's paste this in. Command V. We'll load up Query Inspector, and yep, we can see all the top events here. Make sure that we're using the table function, and we'll go ahead and apply. Cool. So we have, whoops, let's make sure we save this first before we do any reloads. We'll call it RSVPs. Cool. Okay. So that's cool. We know which events have the most people attending them. Let's see which state has the most people going to events. So we'll add another panel. We'll get another Flux query. We will use our query inspector. And yes, we're getting data. So right now, Georgia and New York are dominating. Let's switch this over to a bar chart and go ahead and apply it. All right, so we just covered the basics of the app. This was essentially like the very bare minimum of working with Kafka, but it should give you a pretty good idea on how to work with it. I did create an error in the code though. You can see that California is missing from our bar chart of top 10 RSVP events. But it should be pretty obvious that California should be up there as it is the most populous state. So what I'm going to do in this next segment is cover how to recover from like bad deploys or code issues using a data lake. I will be mentioning my company's product to represent the data lake in this segment. I do think it will still cover some pretty important basics to understand how you can leverage a data lake. But feel free to tune out at this point if you feel it's a little too sales pitchy or you're just not ready for that yet. Let's move on to our data lake. So like I said, I'm using batch for this. We're going to create a new collection. We're going to call it RSVPs. We are using JSON data, so we'll do that. And we're just going to let batch host the data lake for us, just for time's sake. So let's create this. All right, we have an empty data lake. All right, so the next thing we need to do to correct the error we have with our graphs is to create a relay from our Kafka into this data lake, because we're going to need the raw data, and then we're going to have to analyze it for the state of California. which then will replay into our Kafka under a new collection with the corrected script. So let's get started. First thing you want to do is go into the project we pulled down earlier, the Kafka demo, and then you'll go into the Plumber directory, and we will edit the Plumber relay script. And basically all we're going to do is update it with the token of our collection. So under your collection, click the sprocket and select the security token. Perfect. Now all we're going to do is execute the relay. And we can see it's starting to push events in. And in fact, we can see them starting to populate under the collection. All right, and we just did 4,000, 2,000. We made the service really fast because it takes a long, some of these topics can be very large, so we wanted to make sure that we can ingest very quickly the events coming in. So 9,100, I believe that is correct. There should be 9,093 events. I think we're just rounding up here. Let's see. Yeah. So we have exactly 9,093 events collected and written into our collection. That's perfect. So now we need to examine one of these, and let's look for the state. This is exactly what we need. So there are 1.5K events generated with the group state of of California. So the next phase is we need to create a replay destination. In here, you can see we already have one. Let's delete this one. And the reason why we need a dynamic replay destination is because our Kafka is on our local host. There's no way for this cloud product to access your local Kafka. So the way we get around that is using Grpc Handshake. Basically, Plumber will reach out to our Grpc service and initiate a connection between it and our Kafka, or it and the Kafka we're hosting locally. So let's make a new collection because we don't really want to replay the same topics into the main topic, because that'll just duplicate the data and throw it off down the road. So we'll do RSVP CA, and you can see here we need a token. So let's go into the dashboard under name and security, and we can see we already have a token generated. So let's pop that in. Oh, and before we start, we need to make the topic. So let's go into our cough drop instance, and it looks like I already made one. We'll delete it just so we can go through it together. So we'll go new, RSVP CA, number of partitions 5, and replication of 1. So now it's created. Let's go ahead and get our events that we want to replay into that topic. We'll just run it from the command line. Waiting for connection to authorize, waiting for replay messages. I think that's exactly what we want. So let's see destinations. Yes, we have a dynamic destination now. All right, so back to collections. We will get everything with CA as the group state. We will replay results. We'll call it CA replay. And we will select our dynamic Kafka destination. And down here, we'll start to get the event log information. Let's give the page a refresh. Nothing yet. Basically, this is reaching out into your S3 bucket of all of your events, and it takes a little bit longer than the cache search, but there we go. We got 500, 500, 531. So let's see if it shows up in our topic. There you go, 1,503 events. Now, what we want to do is take that original consumer script and we want to modify it to go into our Influx. We want the information on the CA topic to go into our Influx DB. So let's go ahead and pull up our WS producer. I'm sorry, our WS consumer. And what we'll do is we'll just take the topic and we'll change it to RSVP CA, which is correct. And we're going to replay it into the same InfluxDB database. So Python 3, WS consumer. And let's just double check our graphs. Okay, so we've let it run significantly longer than where we last left off. So you can see there's 482 events in PA, 492 in NY. Oh, we need to do one more thing. We need to fix our bad code. Apologies. We want to take this if statement out, if not CA. And then we want to bring this back to. Alright, so let's highlight this. 1, 2. Oops, we gotta go forward 1. And then let's execute our consumer. And let's see if this graph starts to shift at all. Oh, look at that. California. That's probably it, because you got to remember within the reservation there's a yes or no option. Most people respond yes, but there's probably a few no's in there. So now you can see that California is dominating the charts, and let's just see what the latest most popular event is as well. So we'll go to our collection. Oh yeah, let's properly search it. So we'll look for the event ID. Event ID. There we go. Close this up. Client.payload.event event_ID. There we go. So the most popular event is now at St. Joseph's Hill Preserve. All right, that pretty much wraps things up. I hope you guys found the information on data lakes useful and it gives you some good ideas. We'll probably do a video in the future on how to do analytics on your data lake. If you guys have any ideas or future video requests, go ahead and leave a comment below. And feel free to reach out to us at batch.sh if you need any help in the future. Have a great day.